matters.
It makes sense to me that if a group of people were conquered by white people who showed up on boats and dominated the society, that they would have a great influence on a lot of the myths and cultures. And not only that, but that they would heavily discourage deviation from the changes that they've made to those myths. And if you did that over the course of one generation, you would have a complete different narrative.
What intrigues me is that whether he's described as having white skin or a beard or not, we have a tradition of a civilizing hero, Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Bochica in Colombia, Viracocha in Bolivia, depicted as a bearded individual who comes in a time of chaos, who teaches certain skills and then leaves. This tradition is a Pan-American tradition.
No,
David Carrasco, I think you have to respect the work of David Carrasco, has drawn attention to this, and to the and to the notion that the magical pen of Cortez could somehow have hoodwinked an entire continent into making up myths. And I just don't think that's credible at all. I don't understand what your video is telling us either.
My video is trying to explain the complexity of difficulty of interpreting Spanish sources. Can I show a different video that talks about the complexity of Quetzalcoatl as a figure?
Sure.
Can you play the video by, the one by Marika Stoll, but not the hallucinogens one, the other one.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marika Stoll. I'm an archaeologist and research associate at Indiana University. I also live in Oaxaca and work closely with rural indigenous communities. It's been claimed that archaeologists do not engage with indigenous myths. This is simply not true. But once again, context matters. For example, the Quetzalcoatl myth that Graham frequently cites was written 100 years after the conquest by Hispanicized indigenous scribes who were educated by Spanish priests, hence the overtly Christian overtones of this myth. But let's examine an indigenous Mixtec story recorded prior to the conquest. Several gods, including Quetzalcoatl, or Lord Nine Wind in Mixtec mythology, perform a mushroom ceremony and create the known world at Apoola. During this ceremony, Lord Nine Wind plays music by scraping a stone around a human skull. This is a completely different picture of Quetzalcoatl than the one we get from the post-conquest myth preferred by Graham. In fact, in the Mixteca Alta today, when asked by anthropologist John Monahan to draw Quetzalcoatl, his indigenous volunteers drew a plumed serpent surrounded by clouds. Again, context matters.
And so the key thing I'm trying to say here is that Quetzalcoatl, all these different figures, they're not all one thing that you lump together. There's a variety of different traditions. You pick and choose the one that you prefer for your story, which is fine. I think that your investigations and your beliefs are totally cool. I'm not going to convince you otherwise. Same with people listening. I'm trying to show the facts here and just how complex the situation is of indigenous myths, of archaeological evidence. We have a lot of different evidence.
A Pan-American myth of a bearded civilizer could not have been imposed on the indigenous population entirely by Spaniards. So that's my view. That's David Carrasco's view as well. Again, if you look at my response to the SAA's attempt to get Netflix to reclassify my show as science fiction, you'll find detailed information on that there. Let's
Do you mind
move on.
sharing my screen really quickly?
Can I pause you for a second, though? We know that once indigenous people are colonized, that they try to at least alter their beliefs and, if not indoctrinate them into whatever beliefs they have. And we have recent evidence for that in North America with how Native Americans were treated when they were put on reservations and brought into school systems and forced Christianity and told that they couldn't use their language. I mean, we have very recent evidence of human beings trying to impose their ideas on the people that they've conquered. It makes sense to me that that would be something that would also would have been done by the Spaniards that entered Mexico.
Yeah. not persuaded by that in this case. The myth is too widespread, and that constant reference to a bearded figure is very odd. And as a civilization bringer in a time of chaos, in a time of disaster after a great cataclysm, again, I mean, Flint and I can disagree on this. I'm intrigued by that information, and I don't think that the indigenous peoples of the Americas were so easily hoodwinked by the Spaniards.
I don't think it's hoodwinked. I think it's conquered.
As well. And I also think
that you must take into consideration, I would imagine that a lot of these people can't read, and that they're actually probably not only being conquered by the Spaniards, but they're also being imposed upon with their language, which we know to be fact, which is why Mexicans speak Spanish.
Some of these traditions were recorded by Bernardino de Sahagún within 20 years of the conquest. Bernardino de Sahagún is relied upon extensively by archaeologists.
Within
other
20
myths,
years after the conquest,
After
though?
the conquest,
Right,
yeah,
but don't, man, you could do a lot in 20 years.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, there's just no evidence for these kind of culture heroes with this color skin or those kind of
Let's take a
beards
bathroom
that
break.
I don't
let's do
care
it.
about the color skin. I do care about the culture heroes.
Okay, we'll take a bathroom break. We'll come back. Much more to talk about. Okay.
And I also